Hi, I'm Bryan, and welcome to my podcast. If you're looking for something to listen to or something to keep you company, you've come to the right place. Let's talk about anything and everything under the sun here on How to Be Bryan. Hi there, listeners. This is your homeboy Bryan, and welcome to How to Be Bryan, the podcast. This is the reflections and musings of a young adult on a pursuit to educate and live purposefully. If you're listening to the show for the very first time, then please do not forget to subscribe. But if you are an old subscriber or follower, then welcome. We meet again. Welcome to the show, you guys. Sorry in advance for the quality of the audio of this episode if it is not as clear as the previous ones because it is a rainy day. And so if you're listening to this right now and you're hearing rain sounds in the background, then you know what's happening. So a new month has officially started. It is already August, and for some of us it is a magical month, especially for Taylor Swift stans or for the Swifties out there. Shout out to the folklorians who are fans of the teenage love triangle of Betty, James, and Augustine. But for some of us also, the new month also marks the beginning of a new academic year. And in my circle, I am aware that several individuals are officially starting their college life this month. And so I would like to dedicate this episode to all incoming college students. But if you're not an incoming college student, you're still very much welcome to listen to this episode. So I found this article on psychologytoday.com and it talked about tips for first year college students. And while I was reading this article, it brought back a lot of memories, which I will also be talking about on this episode. So this episode, I think, will be partly anecdotal, and I'm thinking whether this episode will be nostalgic or humiliating. But nonetheless, I'm recording this episode with hopes of helping and inspiring incoming college students to start college on the right foot. So I finished college a couple of years ago, but the memories of me being a college freshman or being a frosh are still very much vivid to me, and I can still remember the first few days of my college life. Like the first professors that I had, the first friends that I met, the first subjects that I took up, and my first visits to the campus. I would say in a nutshell that my college life was one hell of a ride, and I consider it as the best 4 years in my life as a student. It was indeed a period of growth, learnings, new experiences, friendships and connections, shifts and changes, challenges, triumphs and successes. And I think the time I have spent off of school puts me in the best position to give tips to those who are about to enter their college journey. With that being said, let's get right to tip number one. Make your classes your top priority. I would say that college also allowed me to explore, and it was indeed a time for exploration, possibilities, and opportunities. But if you want to be a good student, you should focus on your goals and prioritize your classes. Don't forget that college is first and foremost about studies and academics. You did not go to college to meet friends or to go to college parties, but I'm pretty much sure that you can't do that because of the ongoing situation. And you did not go to college just to have fun and try out different things. Yes, it's good to have fun every once in a while, but you have to put your classes first. As the cliche goes, study first before anything else. The second tip says, shoot for perfect attendance in your classes. To be a successful college student, you have to have good habits. And habits can be developed. Develop the habit of going to class regularly and on time. Your attendance and punctuality reflect the kind of work ethic that you have as a student. And it also indicates how serious you are when it comes to your studies. So make sure to attend your classes regularly. The next tip is to never ask for a makeup exam. Makeup exams are not just stressful on the part of the students, but more so on the part of the professors who might be handling other students and other classes. But in case of an actual emergency, or if you're in a difficult situation, then I would suggest for you to communicate with your professors and be transparent to them why you weren't able to take the original exam or take the exam in the prescribed schedule. In that way, maybe you and your professor can come up with a setup that will work for both parties. Tip number 4. Never hand in any work late. So as much as your attendance and punctuality reflect your dedication or your work ethic as a student, your submissions also reflect your diligence. Be mindful of your deadlines. But if you can turn in your assignment or your project earlier than the deadline, then feel free to do so because it will be appreciated by your professors and instructors. Handing in assignments on time or earlier than the deadline is a good habit to develop while you're still in school. Because when you finish school, you will realize and see how valuable time is. So try your best to be a responsible student and give your professors a good impression. One of the mistakes that I committed back in college was turning in an assignment late and then sending an email to my professor telling her why I was unable to submit on time. And the next day, during class time, I approached her and told her about my submission. And she reminded everyone in class how important a deadline is. And that is one of the most important lessons that I had to learn as a student. I have to value other people's time and stop making excuses for myself. Tip number 5 is for students to study twice as much as you think you need for your exams and quizzes. So back in college, I had this phase of sakto lang, or I was just doing what is asked of me and no longer pushing myself past my limits. And it was fine for a couple of semesters, but there came a point when I had to step up my game and be more serious about my studies. Studying twice as much as you think you need is very important because in college, you need to expect the unexpected. Some professors and instructors won't give you pointers before the exams. There might even be instances when the type of exam you will be receiving is different from how the lesson was originally discussed in class. The coverage is also a tricky thing as final exams can be cover to cover, which means that it may include lessons that were discussed during the prelim period, midterm period, up until the final term. You may be tired or exhausted right after, but you will not regret pushing yourself to your limits. You will not regret the effort that you have poured into your studies, and eventually, all your hard work will pay off. The next tip says, don't even come close to plagiarism. Plagiarism is highly frowned upon in the academe, and your professors will be implementing strict guidelines on plagiarism. So you need to know what plagiarism is and how to avoid committing such act. When writing a paper, especially one that requires reading and research, some students have the tendency to just copy and paste from a website. And some students would just paraphrase and change some words and terminologies from the original text to make it seem like a new one. But guess what? That too is still a form of plagiarism. To avoid plagiarism or to avoid plagiarizing, you must learn how to write for yourself and learn how to credit authors, writers, and resources that you used in your writings. You need to learn not just how to paraphrase, but also how to add citations that credit the original source of information. Copy pasting is not something that your professors will tolerate, so be sure to develop your research and writing skills. Tip number 7, put your phone down. So in college, your schedule may be stressful and it may be very difficult to pay attention to the class. But the last thing that you would want to do is to use your phone during class hours. Not only will you be distracted by your phone, but it will also be very disrespectful to your professor if he or she sees you using your phone or gadgets in class. Your professor is not just standing in front of you. He or she is trying to connect to all the students in the class and teach the lesson well. Do you ever get that annoying feeling of talking to someone, but the person that you're talking to does not listen to you and instead uses his or her phone while you're speaking? That is also the same feeling of annoyance that your professors will feel if you use your phone while they are discussing. Although there are different policies when it comes to phone use during class hours, try your best not to use your phone, but if you will, make sure that it is for educational or academic related purposes alone. The following tip advises students to take notes with good old pen and paper. Now, this is something that I wished I had been more consistent with because back in college, I became more relaxed and more dependent on what is asked of me as a student per class. So I believed that professors have different ways on how to teach a subject. And as they say, different strokes for different folks. But I wished I had been more consistent with taking notes, traditionally using pen and paper. And with the advent of technology, it has shifted the way that we study, with the way that we learn. And even if some professors prefer for you to download or save their presentations before going to class, there are also some professors who prefer for students to write something down while they're discussing the lesson or to take some notes on the sides that are not on the PowerPoint presentation. But in general, writing down or taking down notes is a better way of learning because when you write something down, it registers more in your memory. So you remember something more if you write it down instead of just reading it or looking at it or highlighting it. So this is one effective way of retaining information. So be ready with your notebooks and pens. Tip number 9 says take an active approach in your classes. So as a college student who is transitioning from senior high school, or during my time, we were transitioning from junior high school, it's time to take an active approach in your classes. And by taking an active approach, we mean that we have to realize that our professor's basic job description is to teach us and to facilitate our learning. But at the end of the day, the responsibility for our learning is in our hands as students. So what we need to do is to be active when it comes to our learning, take charge, and take responsibility of everything that is related to our learning. It's time to become an independent student. If you can run extra miles and do extra readings on the side, if you have free time, then feel free to do so because it will further add to your existing knowledge that will equip you when you go to class. Taking an active approach in your classes may also require you to communicate with your professor to clarify something. It may also require you to call out the attention of your professor if he or she is going too fast with the topic or not being clear with instructions. Taking charge or taking an active approach in your learning requires you to stand up for yourself when it is necessary. Tip number 10 says, see your professor as your advocate and don't ever let yourself be intimidated by your professor. This is something that I wish I had learned very early in my college life. I must say that a professor's reputation in the campus is established by word of mouth. And by word of mouth, we mean the side stories from other students from other colleges or the encounters of a certain group of students with a certain professor. And those kinds of stories circulate around the campus, therefore building the reputation of a professor. At times, you may have professors who are sitting on masteral degrees, doctorate degrees, and even several degrees at once. They may have even published a number of research papers and studies that have contributed to the stream of knowledge, not just in your university, but in the educational field in general. But do not be intimidated by those kinds of professors. You have to realize that their main job is again to teach you and to mold you and to help you develop your skills. And for that to happen, you need to see them as your advocate and not the enemy. Some professors might even be strict when it comes to requirements and deadlines. Some of them may not even be very approachable in the beginning, but you have to think that their main goal is to help you advance in all kinds of positive ways. Do not let yourself be intimidated by your professor. If you feel small just because you are a student, then recognize that feeling and accept the fact that you still have a long way to go and a lot of things to learn for you to reach a comfortable position or a more comfortable status. If anything, just be respectful. Just be polite and courteous. Your professors will appreciate those things. And we're ending the episode on that note. If you like to continue the conversation, please stay tuned for the second part of this podcast. See you next week only here on this channel. That's it for this episode of How to Be Bryan the podcast. If you liked it, then please do not forget to subscribe and follow me on my social media accounts. I'll talk to you guys again soon. Paalam!